It's Halloween, and this time I will tell the tale of Washington Irving's short novel and fantasy, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Which made the story of the unfortunate Headless Hessian famous worldwide. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is widely considered to be Washington Irving's best work, and it catapulted him to international acclaim. He was famous for writing the short stories Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He wrote Rip Van Winkle in 1819. That story was about an American colonial who fell asleep long before the American Revolution and wakes up long after it, only to be very confused by the new United States. He awakens proclaiming loyalty to King George, angering those around him. While The Legend of Sleepy Hollow takes place just after the turn of the century, in the 1810s. Ultimately, Irving was following the trend of national identity and intrigue about the founding generations, all surrounding the War for Independence. Washington Irving was born on April 3rd in 1783, just before the war was over. He passed away in 1859 in Tarrytown, New York, that very place he wrote about in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He was, however, born in Manhattan. And when Irving was a teenager, there were occasional outbreaks of yellow fever in his hometown. As a result, his parents sent him up to spend the summers in Tarrytown, where he discovered Sleepy Hollow, its ghost stories and Dutch settlements. Stories of witchly hauntings were intertwined in a young Irving's mind. He would have known all of these places, and a few local individuals that he met there even made their way into his fiction. The characters I'm going to discuss, such as Brom Bones and Katrina Van Tassel, were based off real people in the area, and you can find their headstones today at the very same Dutch church where the Headless Horseman is said to arise each night. Therefore, it is time to tell the story, the fun and fictional tale that is renowned as Irving's masterpiece. This is his story of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It begins with his character, one Ichabod Crane, who tarried in that area. A native of Connecticut, he was well educated and learned, something that made him popular among the housewives and ladies of the area. He was, however, exceedingly lank, described as thin with narrow shoulders and long arms and legs. He had a small head, huge ears, and glassy green eyes with a long nose. Not exactly an intimidating figure. He was in fact akin to a scarecrow who just eloped from a cornfield. He became the resident schoolmaster. Apparently good with the students, he was fairly popular among the residents, especially the female circle of the town. Being the local schoolmaster meant he was important in the lives of this rural community. The ladies seemed to like him because he was such a learned man of letters. He would sometimes walk the younger students to home and was apparently handy at carrying local news and gossip from house to house. Ichabod was also the singing master of the neighborhood and gave lessons in return for shillings. One more thing about Ichabod is he loved ghost stories. Having an appetite for the marvelous, he would spend hours reading Cotton Mather's History of Witchcraft and listening to locals' marvelous tales of ghosts, particularly of the Headless Horseman, or Galloping Hessian of the Hollow, as they sometimes called him. Now Ichabod became thoroughly interested in a local girl, named Katrina Van Tassel, after the Van Tassel farm. She was both a wealthy young heiress who was also beautiful. Irving had made his character Ichabod of a foolish heart toward the fairer sex. He gave Katrina singing lessons. Over time, Ichabod tried to woo her, making his advances in a quiet and gently insinuating manner. But so too did every other young man in the valley want to impress her. Also, while Ichabod did like Katrina as a gorgeous and promising partner, he also had stars in his eyes for her immense farm and fortune. The single greatest threat to Ichabod's advances was the greatest man of the valley, Brom van Brunt. He was the hero of the country round, which rang with his feats of strength and hardihood. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short curly black hair, and a bluff, but not unpleasant, countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance. From his Herculean frame and great powers of limb, he had received the nickname of Brom Bones, by which he was universally known. He was a remarkable rider and reported to be the best horseman in the area. His favorite horse was a fiery black stallion named Daredevil, whom only Brom could ride. Brom became increasingly annoyed by the skinny scarecrow's attempts to woo the woman he wanted. Now, Brom had a degree of rough chivalry in his nature, and would fain have carried matters to open warfare. He instead had himself and his friends take to terrorizing Ichabod. They would play off boorish practical jokes upon his rival. Ichabod became the object of whimsical persecution to Bones and his gang of rough riders. Things like smoking out his schoolhouse and turning everything topsy-turvy so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the country held their meetings there. One night, the Van Tassels threw a party at their grand house. Many locals attended, and present was Ichabod, as well as Brom Bones. Ichabod rode there on an old, partly blind gelding he rented named Gunpowder. Upon arriving, Ichabod marveled at the grand home and all the food, for he could often eat with the appetite of several men, despite his lanky appearance. There was dancing and merriment. This night, ghost stories were passed around. Brom told the tale that he had once been overtaken by the Headless Horseman, this midnight trooper, and that he had offered to race with him for a bowl of punch, and should have won too, for Daredevil beat the goblin horse all hollow. But just as they came to the church bridge, the Hessian bolted and vanished in a flash of fire. It was understood by locals that this aforementioned church bridge was a step too far for the ghost, and that he would always disappear. It was reportedly the bridge where the British spy, Major Andre, was hanged after being caught during the war. As the hours went on, the night grew late, and the partygoers all departed over time, except for Ichabod, who lingered behind according to the custom of country lovers, to have a tete-a-tete with the heiress, fully convinced that he was now on the high road to success. However, what happened during this meeting, Washington Irving left a mystery, stating only that it is likely Katrina turned down his declaration of love. Dejected, Ichabod takes to the road for home. It is past midnight, however, and Ichabod rides old Gunpowder into the misty woods, following the hollow roads. Then, out of nowhere, he hears a rider behind him. Calling out, Ichabod gets no reply. The dark figure behind him stayed silent, except for the sudden trit-trot of his horse's hoofs. Picking up pace, Ichabod hurried Gunpowder on, quickening his steed in hopes of leaving this strange midnight companion behind. The dark horse made the only sounds as he got nearer. Ichabod spurred Gunpowder into a gallop. The dark rider followed suit and neared the nervous pair. To Ichabod's terror, he sees the rider. Gigantic in height and muffled in a cloak, Ichabod was horror-struck on perceiving that he was headless. But his horror was still more increased on observing that the head, which should have rested on his shoulders, was carried before him on the pommel of his saddle. His terror rose to desperation, and he rained a shower of kicks and blows upon Gunpowder, hoping by a sudden movement to give his companion the slip. But the spectre started full jump with him. Away then they dashed, through thick and thin, stones flying and sparks flashing at every bound. Ichabod's flimsy garments fluttered in the air as he stretched his long, lank body away over his horse's head in the eagerness of his flight. The old gelding Gunpowder did not make it easy for Ichabod, unskillful rider that he was. He had much ado to maintain his seat, sometimes slipping on one side, sometimes on another, and sometimes jolted on the high ridge of his horse's backbone, with a violence that he verily feared would cleave him asunder. An opening in the trees now cheered him with the hopes that the church bridge was at hand. Another convulsive kick in the ribs, and old Gunpowder sprang upon the bridge. He thundered over the resounding planks. He gained the opposite side. And now Ichabod cast a look behind to see if his pursuer should vanish, according to rule, in a flash of fire and brimstone. Just then, he saw the goblin rising in his stirrups, and in the very act of hurling his head at him. Ichabod endeavored to dodge the horrible missile, but too late. It encountered his cranium with a tremendous crash, and he was tumbled headlong into the dust, and Gunpowder, the black steed, and the goblin rider passed by like a whirlwind. And so, Ichabod Crane was hurled to the ground unconscious by a pumpkin being tossed at his head. It is here we never see Ichabod again. The next morning, old Gunpowder was found without his saddle and with the bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. His owner wondered about the fate of his saddle. His fears about the schoolmaster became increasingly uneasy. His body was nowhere to be found. They found some items near the bridge that were on Ichabod's person from the night before, but nothing more. The mysterious event caused much speculation at the church on the following Sunday. The locals speculated. Some say they saw Ichabod in a faraway town, turning to law school and politics. But the old country wives, however, who are the best judges of these matters, maintain to this day that Ichabod was spirited away by supernatural means, and it is a favorite story often told about the neighborhood round the winter evening fire. The bridge became more than ever an object of superstitious awe. And that may be the reason why the road has been altered of late years, so as to instead approach the church by the border of the mill pond. Now, it is perhaps no coincidence that Brom Bones married Katrina, and often he had a bemused smile and chuckle in his throat whenever the incident was referred to. The schoolhouse, being deserted, soon fell to decay and was reported to be haunted by the ghost of the unfortunate pedagogue. And a plowboy loitering homeward of a still summer evening has often fancied his voice at a distance, chanting a melancholy psalm tune among the tranquil solitudes of Sleepy Hollow. I highly recommend reading the story yourselves, and there are many audiobook recordings available on YouTube. You can experience this fun and fairly lighthearted thriller for yourself. At the end of this fun, fall-filled day, there is no better way to celebrate the season than with horses and a little history. I hope you enjoyed this story, retelling Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Have a great evening and happy Halloween!